With the warm spring weather, the division's weary soldiers who for months had been fighting unrelieved went into reserve and had a brief holiday from battle while in the hills beyond them, the war continued to rage. For soldiers in reserve, peace is a relative thing. In the midst of war, it can mean simply a chance to read and rest and remember other springs. It can mean the silence of your own guns, always poised, always ready, but quiet for a few days because they're out of the enemy's range. It can mean a chance to make new friends, and the troopers of the 1st Cav did a lot of that in Korea, bringing a touch of warmth and hope into lives that had been blighted by war. For the resting cavalrymen, being in reserve offered an opportunity for spiritual re-strengthening for the tough days they knew would be ahead. The expected communist offensive came in the late spring. It was a big one, and it drove the United Nations back. But the UN forces rallied in time and buried the enemy offensive with a mass of firepower. By early summer, the 1st Cav was launching a new offensive of its own, which took it 40 miles to the north into positions it would hold until the following autumn. For the 3rd time, it crossed the 38th parallel near the site of the war's beginning, and it marked the spot with a monument. In October 1951 came the division's last big action, a sustained assault on a series of steep hills, including the now famed Old Baldy. Communists were dangerously entrenched in these hills, which commanded the railroad running north of Seoul, and they had to be blasted out. It was a slow and painful job, for the enemy was literally dug into the rock with a tremendous store of weapons to defend him. The Allied pounding went on for 16 days. When it was over, the division had taken Old Baldy and the vital hills around it, and the United Nations supply line was saved. But the cost had been very great. Sailing back to Japan at the end of 1951, after a year and a half of war, the men of the 1st Cavalry Division took with them a new record of combat greatness. Like the old troopers who had ridden to glory before them, these modern cavalrymen had fought with bravery and devotion for their nation's security and for the integrity of the entire free world. In the contribution they had made to the history of a proud old service, the conditions of cavalry fighting had changed, but the cavalry's tradition of valor endures.
And that is the story of the 1st Cavalry Division in Korea. Now this is Sergeant Stuart Queen, inviting you to be with us next week for another look at your United States Army in action on The Big Picture.
The Big Picture is a weekly television report to the nation on the activities of the Army at home and overseas. Produced by the Signal Corps Pictorial Center. Presented by the United States Army in cooperation with this station. You too can be an important part of the big picture. You can proudly serve with the best equipped, the best trained, the best fighting team in the world today, the United States Army.